Okay, shall we resume then now? Are these the attachments for the letter? Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll resume where we left off this morning. I've now received the attachments to the Kent County Council letter which they put in this morning, and these comprise, there's a letter from 2014 in which the County Council expresses its opposition to bus lanes on the 8274 Sutton Road. There's the council representations concerning the plan application at Boughton Lane, which is to be redetermined by the Secretary of State, and the representation that the council is objecting on highway grounds to that development. The Secretary refused it previously on highway grounds, but the County Council is now objecting to that on highway grounds, so it didn't before. And they refer in that to the plan applications on Sutton Road, which they say another circumstance that's changed since the previous appeal, and concerned about cumulative effects of additional traffic on the wider network. And there's the minutes of the Joint Transportation Board meeting held in February this year. Just on that last matter, can I just ask the council just to explain the particular point they're raising in relation to those minutes? Is the minutes of the Joint Transportation Board February this year. This comes to me. I'm taking it there an attachment to the letter. or was it just in relation to a point that was raised this morning?
It's just, sir, if I may, it's just clarification in question 1A that you asked us, which was, can NBC rely on the figure of 14,034 dwellings?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this is the minutes. There's a reference to that modelling that was done on the 14,000 figure for 2022, and conclusions from that, and then there's reference to the verbal comment which the Kent County Council made to the Joint Transportation Board meeting, that the impact of 14,000 dwellings will not be the same across the whole network. It doesn't mean that individual applications can have considered separate highway terms. As far as I can see, that's a minute of the verbal report. That wasn't. I don't see the actual resolution on relation to numbers, but I understand that the County Council is making its position clear to the Joint Translation Board. Okay. Mr. Jarman.
Yes. Sorry, Mr. Miller. Just a point of clarification from this morning. You asked the question with regard to background growth, and Mr. Whittaker gave an answer. Myself and the team have been trying to find the examination document that is relied upon with regard to information on background growth. It's just clarification of which document it is, so we can check it out again.
So you haven't found it yet? No, that's okay. Councillor Vyden, Sutton Valence Parish Council.
Thank you, sir. Sutton Valence is in the same ward as Langley. We meet at the Plough, but I'm getting very worried that our parish does not exist when traffic planning or modelling is discussed. The Borough commissioned a study of the A274 corridor from the Wheatsheaf Junction, but it finished at Warmlake Crossroads, a known accident, the black spot on the edge of Sutton Valence. I quote Moat MacDonald's report on that patch of road, sir. The A274 carries on beyond the development allocated sites, turning to the south. A priority junction with Horseshoes Lane leads east to Langley Heath Village, while the A274 continues south to 5 Wents, the priority junction with Plough Went Road and Leeds Road. The corridor then continues south to Warmlake Corner, the priority junction with Chartway Street and Warmlake Road, and then on to Sutton Valence, Headcorn and Bindon. The area is largely agricultural, and so at harvest time, the A274 attracts an increased proportion of heavy goods vehicles transporting produce to markets. This section of the route experiences minimal traffic congestion, and while there are regular service buses, they operate at very low frequencies. The officer who wrote the report, Moat MacDonald, I believe, obviously does not know how farming methods have changed.
So which report is that?
It was the Moat MacDonald report.
The?
Mott MacDonald.
Oh, the Mott MacDonald report, yeah.
NBC commissioned it. Yeah. There are 3 packing houses in the area. Fruit is imported and packed for supermarkets 12 months of the year. HGVs collect and deliver fruit 7 days a week. Gone are the happy rural days of seasonal fruit picking. That's all finished. I can only assume that Moat MacDonald did not venture into the country. The A274 is a nightmare for everyone. The Leeds and Langley bypass will not reduce the traffic through my parish. Traffic will still come from the south of the borough to access the M20. Sutton Valence Hill will not change. It is a pinch point with traffic at a standstill when two HGVs try to pass. We have reservations on the costing of the bypass. Will we have development through Leeds, Langley and Otham, turning a beautiful area into another Allington or Barming? The borough have suggested our residents walk or cycle. I suggest officers and members get on their bikes and cycle from the town centre to Sutton Valence. Walking, not many footpaths in our area, sir. To get to town, I use the Park and Ride, an excellent service. I drive from Sutton Valence down to Willington Street, almost onto the A20 Ashford Road. A Park and Ride should be at Langley Park or Parkwood. It would take traffic from the A274 south, from the A229 from Linton across the Heath Road, and reduce the traffic congestion at the Wheatsheaf. It seems obvious to me, sir. Hundreds of cars would use this route. Just one other thing I'd like to mention about parking in Maidstone. I believe it's going to be increased by 50%. Thank you, sir.
Okay, I'll hold those thoughts because we've got items later on the agenda which are relevant to those
okay,
points.
Thank you.
But Dr. Driver, I mean, obviously you're further out on the same road.
Indeed, and what the first point I wanted to make was, in fact, development in the southeast of the borough does not stop at the edge of the urban area, and you've got significant development not just in Headcorn but also in Staplehurst and Sutton Valence and the like. And these are all areas which rely very heavily on car usage, particularly for commuting, and they are all areas where the amount of development that is proposed will be significantly in excess of the number of local jobs available. So you will see an increase in out-commuting to wherever, so just from the local area, not from the borough, in terms of the definition of out-commuting, compared to current patterns. If you look at Headcorn for the number of dwellings that Maidstone Borough Council has indicated that, or has given permission for, which is 497 since the start of the plan period, even if you looked at the most optimistic jobs forecast for the local area, you're likely to see 161 jobs within Headcorn Parish. That's 25% of the number of economically active residents you would expect associated with the amount of housing that's being proposed. Now, Headcorn has a above-average car usage for the borough, so 67.3% of commuters in super output area 017, which encompasses Headcorn Parish, use the car in order to get to work. And if you compare that, say, to the urban area, which is around 60%, that's significantly above average. There is nothing that I have seen that is likely to reduce this car usage. The presumption that simply because you have a station, everyone will use the train is clearly false. Train usage from Headcorn accounts for only 15.6% of commuters. So it's clear that car usage wins out every time. Headcorn Parish is considerably concerned about the development both in the southeast of Maidstone and also at Woodcock Farm, and how they will affect the accessibility of potential employment opportunities within the parish, and also potential businesses within the parish, how they will access other areas. Not just the A274 and the congestion on it, but also the B2163 out to the M20 junction, which is I don't think I've ever driven down it and not had to wait for quite some time for cars to pass, because it is single lane in some parts. That will obviously see significant additional traffic in the event of the Woodcote Farm employment allocation being agreed. And that's traffic in normal times. That doesn't encompass, for example, when Leeds Castle is holding an event. In terms of bus usage, I think I'm right in saying, and for the experts, please feel free to contradict me, that the proposed mitigation methods for the bus usage is to run the bus 82 line out to the Langley area, and it will have a frequency of between 15 to 20 minutes. I note that if you look at the super output area, which is Parkwood, which is in a similar location, it also is on that bus route, which has bus journeys every 9 minutes into the centre of town. Only 10.5% of commuters from Parkwood use the bus, and therefore I'm slightly curious as to how a less frequent bus service is going to be associated with an increase in bus usage. And one final point, if I may, sir. One of the choice variables that Maidstone Borough Council have is the housing numbers that they're looking to sort of allocate through their local plan. They've decided to go for a proposed housing requirement of 18,560, but actually their objectively assessed need is only 17,660, and therefore purely just going to the objectively assessed need through their SHMA report, they could reduce housing allocations. Thank you.
Okay. And at previous sessions, though, you have suggested that expanding Maidstone is the most sustainable choice in terms of where housing should go. Does it follow from that you would support housing estates on the edge of Maidstone rather than elsewhere?
In terms of having an urban-centred approach, absolutely, it's the most economically sustainable approach. However, if you look at the geographic distribution of houses within the Maidstone urban area, it's clearly unbalanced in terms of the southeast of Maidstone, and you're moving significantly far out of the centre of Maidstone. So you're ending up with sort of a very long ribbon of development, which actually would be also less efficient from an economic perspective.
Isn't that more efficient from a public transport perspective?
That I couldn't answer, sir.
Okay. So, Mr. Hughes.
Thank you, sir. Just to develop that point more widely, the local plan, in broad terms, allocates 2/3 of its housing on sites which have access from the A274 or the A229. And that results in, I think it's roughly 3,300 new houses having access to the A274 and roughly 2,200 houses having access to the A229. And that would give rise, if you take the economically active average people per household from the 2011 census, of 4,307 new economically active people coming onto the A274 and 2,867 new economically active people coming onto the A229. And if you take the 2011 census distribution of commuting, I won't go into the figures, but that gives, it's something like 2,000 to 3,000 extra on the A229, on the A274, and 1,500 to about 1,700 on the A229. Now, I'm bringing these figures forward because I think we started off this discussion about the VISM modelling and what the impact of all this development on particularly the junctions of the A229 and the A274 would be. And I believe that the VISM modelling, because it models, as I understand it, the general road network, significantly underestimates the impact of the kind of development that I've just outlined on these pinch points in South East Maidstone. And that is confirmed, actually, by the DHA transport assessment that is one of the appendices today of the Borton Lane development proposals, where it clearly says in there that that's exactly what the VISM modelling does. So the only way, it seems to me, that the proponents of development have seen a way forward is to propose wildly optimistic modal shift proposals. But when you look at it, the local plan had, it started off with a modal shift policy. It was quite comprehensive. It had park and ride sites. It had.
So you're talking about the 2000 local plan, the current one?
No, I'm talking about this local plan. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it had a number of bus lanes and shared car access lanes in the bus lanes. Most of those have now gone. And in fact, when you look at it, in terms of the A274 and particularly the A229, there is no space on the A229 for bus priority measures, let alone bus lanes. And what you have there is a situation where the traffic is already incredibly congested. At times, it is threatening to feed back to the Swan Lane junction and stop that working properly. And so we're just in a situation where the proposals that are being put forward are based on wildly optimistic assumptions, and they don't take account of pedestrians. There's no, as far as I can see, in all the assessments that have been done, there is no assessment of pedestrian delay. Because if you're going to increase the green time for the traffic at all these junctions, you're going to get increased pedestrian delay. And as I understand it, the NPPF is saying that you should be giving priority to pedestrians, but you're not. And the proposal is that also there's a modal shift to cycle use. Well, if you look at the cycle provision in South East Maidstone, there is only one continuous route which runs roughly parallel to the A274. There isn't a route at all down the A229. And in terms of pedestrians, it's already been said, people are, all these things are very weather related. Okay, if it's a lovely day, people might be prepared to walk 5 kilometres or cycle 5 kilometres, but if it's not, they won't. And, we don't live in a country where it is sunny every day. In fact, most of the time it rains. And we're putting pedestrians in a situation, or even people who want to travel on the bus. What are they doing? They're standing at the side of the road, of congested roads, in places that are already air quality management areas, so that they already have an air quality problem. And whilst they're waiting for the buses, which are delayed by the congestion, they're just breathing in more and more fumes from the vehicle exhausts. That's the reality of the situation that we have. Okay. Thank you.
Right, I'm going to get back to the agenda now because we're somewhere from the questions. Where we were at is question 12.9. We're talking about the County Council clarifying its position post a statement of common ground. A number of things have been said since then. Clearly, the County Council's position is that all the proposed allocations in South and South East Maidstone would result in an unacceptably severe impact, and they've suggested why that is, and because of the particular effects on the A229, A274, and the Borough Council just to respond about what they would point to say why, in their view, there isn't an unacceptably severe impact, and they could summarise their position on that.
Yes, sir. I think it is a question that's dealt with in 12.13, on your questions 12.13, in the Council's response, which goes into a lot of detail from 12.13 all the way through across the page into 12.13.22. So a lot of the detail is already contained in there. But I think in terms of summation, we've also included within that package the cumulative transport impact assessment that was carried out by DHA in combination with Bellway Homes to support the H110 application. Now, I don't wish to take you through it all in minute detail, but I would refer you on the back of page 3 to the cumulative transport impact assessment, and I would draw your attention to 1.2.10 of...
So which appendix are we on?
Sorry, it's the cumulative transport impact assessment, so it's Appendix E and F that was submitted as part of the evidence for today, and that refers to the cumulative transport impact assessment by DHA Transport. Yeah. I would just draw your attention to page 3, 1.2.10, and draw your attention to all the sites that were included in that cumulative transport assessment, which were Land Rear Police Headquarters ×2, the 2 applications, the land at Langley Park, and it gives references, land north of Sutton Road, land west of Bicknor Farm Cottages, Bicknor Farm, and land west of Church Road, Oatham. So, in terms of the assessment that the application considered, it considered the cumulative impact assessment of all those sites. And in terms of I would also refer you to Appendix G as well, which is sort of an update that went to the committee report, which sets out effectively the mitigation proposed as part of that cumulative impact report. It sets out the Highways comments to break it down into sort of a more digestible form, and it sets out the mitigation that was proposed as part of that package. It also sets out and illustrates how, in most cases, arising from the mitigation, that there was an improvement in the overall operating capacity as opposed to without mitigation. So I think that's clearly evidenced through the Appendix G assessment and is set out in the council's assessment. So I think the council's view is, and that view was accepted by the council's transport consultants, Mark McDonald's, and by the planning committee, that it would not result in a severe cumulative impact. And I think the evidence demonstrates that point. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Right. Right, well, so we'll work through so Mr. Cooling, as a comment, then we'll start working through the rest of the questions here.
Are we still on 12.9?
Yes.
In that case, shall I proceed? It is directly on that.
Yes, okay.
Okay. We have coordination...
We'll strictly on 12.10, but yeah, go on, yes. That's all right, it's okay, 12, yes.
Apologies. The coordinating team has characterised the Statement of Common Ground as a fig leaf. Having said that, I think we will give compliments to KCC Highways for trying to bend over backwards to find a way through this, because it's very embarrassing for our borough that the local plan, if it ends up unsound because of lack of dialogue. But the two main concerns we have about the Statement of Common Ground, firstly, it relies, for the future, it relies upon, really, cooperative dialogue between the two parties. And I think we've had another example today of where that, shall we say, has been a struggle in the past, and why should it be any better in the future. But I think that as important is the statement's focus upon 2022, or to be precise, commenced by 2022. And this morning we heard a discussion about whether modelling should be based on 14,000 odd, or is it 8 or 9 or 10 or 11. Mm-hmm. But the trajectory, which is in the original document on page 291, mm-hmm. If anything, it has got even more complicated. But the main point here is that by sometime in the financial year 2018-19, the borough will not have a 5 years housing supply on this trajectory. The trajectory is not being managed, and therefore, in a couple of years' time, the borough is going to have to pull more sites forward, and therefore, by 2022, it's not going to be this trajectory, it's going to be a higher one. And by the way, after 2022, it's going to take time to digest and do something. So we're talking big problems which, I'm sorry, this fig leaf, despite the county's efforts, is not going to solve the situation for residents. The main mitigation which the coordinating team have argued, it is not just what Dr. Driver said about getting down to what is the needs, but we've actually argued, and we won't go through it again, that in fact the application of planning practice guidance was flawed to the extent that certain permitted adjustments for past statistical errors weren't used, and they could have, exaggeration, they could have halved the 18,560. Thank you.
Just on that 5 year supply point, I think I'm not sure how you've calculated that. You're saying because the annual supply dips below the average, you're saying that's not 5 year supply?
Unfortunately, this graph, which is very helpful, but by the way, it's out of date given the material that's come forward for next week's session. Mm-hmm. It would have been beneficial if there had been another line showing for each year what the forward 5 years was. Yeah, so I've had to do it by inspection, but by inspection, 2018-19, looking forward, dips below a 5 year supply. By inspection.
Yes. Can the council answer that point?
I believe you'd need to look at the housing topic paper, which actually confirms the council's position that there will be a rolling 5 year supply throughout the local plan period. That plan referred to there is simply a snapshot at the point of submission. As is already referenced, it is out of date, but the crucial point in respect of the 5 year supply position going forward is on the rolling 5 year supply analysis, which is part of the housing topic paper.
Okay. Yes, well, I don't want to get into a whole debate about the how.
No, but very quickly, I'm extremely au fait with rolling statistical figures, and the adjustment you've put in for the projection worsens the situation compared to that. And by inspection, you cannot, I'm being blunt, you cannot be correct given these projections. There is a gap in the 5-year supply.
Yeah, well, we have a housing supply session next week, so I think I'd like to return that now. Return to that then. Okay. I don't think. I think we'll to get on some more specifics in the later questions. So I think we've heard it, enough on the respective positions of KCC and the borough overall. 1211. This is getting on to the matter of the Leeds Langley Relief Road. And the question I asked there was, what is the likely first date by which such a road could become operational? And if a route and funding were agreed such it could be included in the first local plan review, could it realistically be implemented before the end of the local plan period? Now, the Borough Council makes the point that in any case it isn't going to be available by 2022, which was the date that the interim strategy, which the GTB said to support, was looking at. And so, certainly at that data will be available. The County Council estimate is that given the work necessary to identify a preferred scheme, an outline business case, and an indicative funding model, that will be completed by 2022 in order to inform the first review of the plan, and then there'll be a timeline for scheme delivery. And it says, if it's assumed that efforts to secure funding are in parallel and are successful, the County Council's initial view is that the road could be operational within 10 years. That assumes 8 years for design process, public engagement, statutory orders and planning approval can be completed within 8 years, and construction of the road could then be completed within a further 2 years. I'm not sure when it starts. In order to achieve that, that seems to imply to me that you have an in-principle decision to go ahead with that road before the 2022 review in order to achieve that. I was trying to understand, because it says it takes to 2022 to do that, to inform the review of the local plan, but does that 10 years then start once you've reviewed the plan and the plan has decided includes that as a proposal, or do you need to actually decide that at an earlier date that you're going to build the road? Mr. Reid.
It's just to give you an idea from now, so it's 10 years roughly from now, about 2027.
Yes, but if it's 10 years from now, then at what point, though, does a decision need to be made in principle to have a road? I mean, we've got the local plan talks about investigating it and so on, and building the business case, and the borough and the county working in cooperation to do that. Which implies that so you build a business case and you produce the evidence says, well, actually we think there's a good case for having this road, and we should commit to going ahead. Is that come before the 2022 review, or in order to achieve that 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, if I was estimating how long that would take to do the business case, the environmental surveys, the design work, the options appraisal, because it won't just be about evaluating the benefits of a road, it'll be versus any other transport interventions that we might come up with. If we got those done within 2-3 years, then and the funding work was done in parallel, that would then allow a following 7-year period to get the thing physically in place and built. Is that what you meant?
Well, what that means is that into 2-3 years then, so in 2019 you'd be saying, they'd be committing to say, yes, we're going to build the road.
Yeah, we ought to have got to a point by 2019, possibly 2020, where we've decided that actually it's the right thing to do, if that's what you mean.
Yes. Yes, okay. So that's potentially ahead of the local plan review. Okay. And if it's 10 years from now, then the earliest it could be available will be 2027. Okay, so that's... okay, the next question on that was to qualify for government funding and to attract developer contributions, if they're needed to fund the road, would it need to be demonstrated that that road would contribute to further housing or employment growth?
Not entirely. I mean, the large local majors funding stream is different to the local growth fund. It just, it depends which stream is the most successful in terms of return. So, I mean, if you ask me to estimate again now, which would be the most appropriate source, it would be the large local majors schemes fund. What we've been consistent in saying throughout the debate around Leeds Langley bypass is that we don't want it to be the trigger, if you like, the cause of mass development going out to the new road. In other words, an extension of the urban boundary.
Because in the County Council 2014 representations, then you're suggesting that road improvement would allow, for example, a new settlement at Kingswood as part of that, and Kingswood are going to come tomorrow to say that they think they could help to fund a road like that. So, but you're suggesting that it isn't dependent upon other that sort of growth.
No, not entirely. I mean, there could be modest development in Leeds or Langley. There could be. I mean, the whole idea of an urban extension in Kingswood is a completely separate matter. But no, the prospect of funding the road is not entirely dependent upon there being 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 new houses between the edge of the urban area now and the new road out towards the villages. That's definitely not our position.
Okay. And you're saying that you would need to consider, part of the case for that, you'd need to consider the alternatives. What alternatives there may be?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. Now, I think there's I mean, obviously the plan only makes a kind of a reference to investigating that. It isn't a plan proposal, and therefore, there wouldn't be a commitment in the plan to go ahead with that, just to investigate it. And there are, clearly some different views from people who made representations about whether things are a good idea or not. We have I think it's in some way, for example, Leeds Parish Council has expressed support, and Langley Parish Council is much more concerned about the possibility of attracting development if it does go ahead. I think that's their respective positions. CPRE Kent had strong doubts about whether it will be completed within the local plan period. And they had concern about building roads having induced traffic effects. There's some support from Helen Grant in her letter, which didn't mention that this morning. Okay, so yes, in the in the council's responses, they talk about funding, because they asked in question 12.12 how it might be funded, and they talk about a range of funding sources there, which they say could include local growth fund, the local enterprise partnership, or funding through new development via Section 106 contributions, which may include enabling development. And other funding mechanisms such as capturing enhanced land values and the large local major schemes fund, which you just mentioned, may also be considered. Countryside Properties, who are the H110 developers, don't think it could be met in full or part from developer contributions, and they don't think government funding is likely if it's not linked to housing or employment growth. So the number of potential issues. Okay, Mr. Jarman.
No, we certainly don't see it being funded through Section 106 monies because, as you alluded to, there isn't that development allocated in the plan. Just going back to one of your earlier points, as local planning authority, we see perhaps the first key stage as being a sustainability appraisal. It may well be that there's a good case for a Leeds-Langley bypass. Not sure where the north and south points are, but as a concept, it might well be needed in the future. But that would have to be compared objectively with other potential strategic solutions. There could be something to the south of Maidstone. There could be something to the west of Maidstone, working with Tunbridge and Moorland. We don't know today if that is the only strategic solution to Maidstone's future problems. And obviously, we are saying we have given robust evidence to prove that our plan is sound up until 2031.
Right. I mean, we've addressed some of these points already, but in question 12.13, so in the interim before that route or funding was identified, should mitigation works be carried out on the existing network to address the impact of development that's already been committed? And refer the respective positions of the borough and the county. The borough saying that the mitigation works it's identified will be adequate for all the developments in the local plan. The county saying that it's only adequate for that which already has essentially planning permission. I mean, the county has said today that their concern is with the spatial distribution of development, and it's been pointed out, I think, that when they reported to the Joint Transportation Board in February 2016 on the 2022 modelling, they said that overall it couldn't be said that there's a severe impact after development. But as I think has been repeated again today, the impact is where that 14,000 dwellings is distributed, and the objection is to the distribution in South and South East Maidstone, and that kind of begs the question of where else, if there are other spatial strategies which could be accommodated, which could be delivered within that same period. Now, just on a very kind of crude basis, because it means if you're delivering it somewhere else, it either means in or around Maidstone, or it means elsewhere in the borough. Is the counter position still that their first strategy is the distribution which they're suggesting in the Regulation 18 stage, which is to say that no additions to Maidstone town, essentially, but new developments outside the town. They mentioned then Detling, Kingswood. They also propose a site east of Church Road at Otton, which the County Council owns, 450 dwellings, which it seems to me would be using the same corridor, the same A274 corridor. Are those still the alternatives which the County Council has in mind. Okay, well, Ms. Cooney, if you want to make a contribution with that,
Yes.
think about that. Okay.
You want me to go? Sorry.
Yeah. So no, so if you wanted, yes, carry on. Yes.
Yes, apologies. You mentioned if the southeast extension, which effectively what it is, cannot go ahead, where else within the borough? Is that the only option? Well, I think the coordinating team would suggest two. The first one is not meant to be facetious and meant to be very serious, that the 18560 itself should not stand the test of time. But secondly, as we have discovered very recently, Tunbridge and Malling, in its issues and options paper, has identified that they have flexibility between the sites they've in outline identified and the sites they need to meet their possible objectively assessed housing need. They've got 4,000 flexibility. And no doubt some of that, well, a lot of that is just over the border, the top end of Hermitage Lane on either side of it. So I'm sorry, there are two options. 18560 comes down because it's a constraint or because it wasn't calculated properly. Secondly, that there should be the duty to cooperate exercised again and properly and minuted with Tunbridge and Malling to absorb some of our need that we cannot absorb. Thank you.
Okay. But that's around Hermitage Lane, which you were saying earlier.
Yeah, the top end of Hermitage Lane, I'm not wishing you to journey up there because you may not make it back for your next meeting. But
I have been to Hermitage Lane.
But you head north, and on either side of that, then you've got the Aylesford commercial area, etc., etc., etc.
Okay. Mr. Reid.
Sorry, the reason I'm struggling with your question, sir, was because we haven't actually been asked, or we haven't tested an alternative distribution. So I don't want to give you an answer that's just guesswork. In other words, if you're asking me as a transport planner, where might the development go if it's not going to be around the urban area, then it's places where there is far less capacity constraint. So there's villages, there's locations right outside the urban area where there's not the same degree of constraint as there is in the south and southeast Maidstone. But I'm not a planner, we're not the plan-making authority. The spatial distribution of housing is something that once we start asking, or you start asking, where we would put it instead, I'm not best qualified to answer you. What I am best qualified to tell you is that the evidence we've got so far clearly indicates what we've said umpteen times now about the south and southeast sector, and we haven't comprehensively tested other alternative spatial distributions that might work. But we're happy to do it, but we haven't done it so far.
But the other villages, I mean, several of the larger villages are to the south of Maidstone, and as we've heard, we're using the same roads to go into Maidstone. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Could I just add to Mr. Reid on that, because obviously we've had quite a lot of dealings with the Staplehurst applications where they've recently went to committee and members resolved to approve, but KCC objected to those. So if you're objecting, and that's a rural service centre on our hierarchy, if you're objecting to those, where else are you proposing to then put them? Because you object to the Staplehurst at the main junction, so there must be somewhere else that you can advise the council then.
Sir, I think, with respect, James is confusing our role here. We're simply giving technical arguments based on evidence around traffic congestion and traffic capacity. I'm not qualified to start suggesting where else he puts his houses.
Okay. So, but you're saying that the Regulation 18 representations by the County Council didn't have the benefit of traffic advice? I was advised.
Yes, so if you're referring to the 2014 response,
yes.
No, there wasn't. There wasn't
okay.
transport modelling behind that. No.
Okay. Okay. Right, from paragraph 3.9. Sorry, Mr. Wild wants to come in. I mean, I expect on that last matter was of interest, to him, but so he might want to say something.
Thank you. There's an element of overlap with your sections 3.9 onwards, actually. I was going to raise the question about the spatial distribution testing, and I think it's critically important because we heard it at the transport seminar, and I just wanted to seek clarification again because we weren't able to speak at the time, but I believe it was asked by yourself whether any options had been tested, any other options, and I believe that the council has just implied that they haven't tested any other options because they didn't think there were any other options, and they're asking the council advice on where they should have gone. I mean, obviously, we've heard the county say this morning that they would have supported a scheme in the location we're suggesting at Detling. It validly warrants testing within a spatial distribution manner, along with probably many other options. I fail to see how the plan can be found sound when there is absolutely no evidence of more than one spatial distribution strategy being tested, especially when there are evidently sites that could be tested in that format. I think I just make one point that another gentleman, Mr. Pullman, mentioned earlier on about the function of the VISUM model, and that it exists not to test the detailed impact at junctions. It is there for the very purpose of spatial distribution testing, and it hasn't been put to that purpose, unfortunately. Thank you.
Yes, okay, go ahead.
To be fair to the borough, back in 2010, they did look at two scenarios. One was a distributed housing, and the other one was an urban extension. And they turned away from the urban extension. They wanted distributed. But I compliment them now. They're effectively getting an urban extension by stealth.
Okay. Mr. Lillam.
Thank you, sir. Probably goes without saying that my client and my practice broadly support the proposed spatial distribution strategy. And I just wanted to address a few points and clarify a few matters that have been raised a little bit earlier around the cumulative transport work that we did in respect to H110, land south of Sutton Road. That took account of 8 other developments, many of which Mr. Bailey raised earlier. The methodology and the scope of the work that we did was agreed with KCC Highways at the outset, some 2 years ago now, and that included the models that we used to test junction capacity. That was all matters that were agreed, and that is documented and can be provided. I have to say there was a lack of constructive engagement thereafter from KCC Highways, despite our best efforts, once the local plan process went ahead. I would note that we assumed no mode shift as well in the work that we did.
So you assumed no
modal shift.
No mode shift.
So we take the existing mode shift in the locality of the site, and it is assumed that that remains constant in the work that we do. So I would submit that that is a overly robust position. Thereafter, we looked at the link flows that were coming out of our modelling from those committed and proposed sites and background growth, which takes account to some extent of developments further afield in places like Headcorn. And actually, the link flows we were getting for the end of the plan period are higher than those that the VISUM model is suggesting. So, again, an overly robust
So what's higher than
position.
what? Say again?
So the link flows, so the traffic volumes that our model was suggesting would be on the likes of Sutton Road, Willington Street, etc., at the end of the plan period, using our methodology, were higher than those that the VISUM model were forecasting. So again, like the mode shift, an overly robust position. And the reason for that is that we fully appreciated that there was no agreed integrated transport strategy at that time, and there was a need for a very detailed and robust piece of work that took a worst-case assumption around likely flows and mitigation requirements. As part of our environmental statement, because this was EIA development, we looked at pedestrian severance impacts on non-motorised users. That's something that's required under EU law and UK law. So, again, that point has been addressed. around the impact both of the increased traffic flows and the mitigation proposals, the impact that would have on things like pedestrian crossing, pedestrian experiences on the Sutton Road corridor. Once the application was submitted, and that went in with a very detailed and costed set of mitigation for some 6 junctions, I believe, many of which are addressed in the Statement of Common Ground that we talked about earlier. We engaged constructively with Mott MacDonald's in the absence of such engagement with KCC, and I have to say it was a rigorous process. You know, there were a number of iterations and reiterations of our transport assessment during that period before we got to a point where we could agree that the assessment was sound and that Maidstone Borough Council felt fit to take that application to committee on that basis. So I hope that's helpful in terms of setting out the detailed piece of work that was done, which, using more appropriate tools, as touched upon by Mr Wild, than VISUM is for actual planning applications and focused work on certain corridors and certain junctions. We feel it is a more robust evidence base than that which the County Council relies on to make its objections. I hope that's helpful.
Okay. Thank you. Ms Hughes.
Thank you, sir. Yes, just firstly to 2 points. Just firstly to comment on the points that have been made. In terms of the VISUM model, I don't think you could get. It'd be very difficult to get lower flows that were shown for the A274. I said previously that the development on those 2 roads would generate somewhere over 7,000 new economically active people, and yet the VISUM link flow westbound in the AM peak on the A274. So westbound is going towards the town centre, where a very significant proportion of the traffic is going, including, I would argue, the extra 7,000 odd who are being generated by the new growth. And that shows that, and this is in Appendix E, page 10, that on the due minimum 2022 figures, there would be an additional 41 vehicles westbound, and with the Do Something 4B approach, there would be a reduction of 24 vehicles in the AM peak. I mean, that just, and that is why I said that I felt that the VISUM model significantly underestimates the impact of that development on the Wheatsheaf Junction. I am no.
Sorry, before we lose that point, should I just find the document? What's the document? Appendix C, yes. So Appendix C, page 10. Research. You've got a paragraph number there. I was just trying to find the.
No, it's page 10 in the Appendix E, and it is which shows the AM link flows, and it is the first.
Is that
site.
table? Because I don't have a table on my page 10.
Appendix E. Yes, Appendix
I'm
E.
looking at that's my Appendix E.
No, I'm talking about the VISUM model.
Oh, it's VISUM. Right. VISUM model is that you got is that TRA one of the TRA numbers?
It's TRA 36. Yes.
Right. TRA 36, which I think is actually superseded by ED 28. But confirming the figures changed, but look at that. Right. Page 10 of mine looks like that. Is that? No? Right. Well, this is TRA 36. This is it's a summary of technical notes. Is that that same document?
It's the Appendix E.
Mm-hmm. Appendix E to, that's a summary, so that's not the... so I'll try this one. This is the tempo data. This is TRA 35 I've got.
I'm looking at Appendix E of TRA 36.
Right. Well, I've got, say, this is...
In fact, I'm looking at the amended version of TRA 36.
Well, that'd be ED28.
In which I think additional tables were included.
Yes. Sorry? I don't think I have a 36A. This is in here. Oh, this might be it. Okay. Is it session starts like that? It starts with a...
It starts off with a map, yeah. Yes, showing the...
I've got this table.
Yeah, link flows.
I think link flows. It's all types of link flows. Yes. This is a PM link flow.
Yeah,
right?
AM. Well, the figures that I quoted were for the AM link flow, which is the second. Is that table AM link flows?
I've got yes, RVS. Previous page, yeah. AM link flows. I think we may have got there. Right. Okay.
And so the figures that I gave were the second line, westbound.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, just to restate my conclusion on that, it wouldn't be very difficult to get flows that were greater than those flows, greater increases than those flows, because those increases, taking account of the fact of all the development and all the new economically active people that will be generated by the development, are incredibly small.
Yeah. Mr. Whittaker, perhaps, is there an explanation of this, that the flow is restricted by the route capacity? That, you know, that the reason the flow hasn't gone up more is because you can't get more than that many vehicles down the road. Is that the explanation?
That may well be part of the reason, sir. I mean, obviously, looking at that, it does look a little bit illogical. It may be something to do with where the link flow has been taken from and where the development is distributing onto the network. I mean, underestimate or not, I mean, it doesn't detract from the county's position that the outcomes, based on this evidence, they feel is unacceptably severe on the network.
Mm-hmm.
The VISM model is underestimating the impact.
Yeah, because you're assuming that the pattern of flows stays the same with the extra people. You know that they, because you've applied the existing movements where people go now to the larger number of people. You're saying that each of the routes that people take now will have that many more people using it. But the problem, I think the modelling, I assume, works out that the actual capacity is going to have a bearing on this, because if more people can't get down that route, they either don't make the journey at all, or they do something else. You know, they find an alternative.
Yes, sir. It could very well be the point that you made earlier today, that those junctions are so over capacity that people are choosing alternative routes. But my point, but then I would make the point, we're talking about a lot more people, and we are not talking about improving in this plan, improving the transport system significantly within Maidstone, so that then the question arises, where are those people going to go to? And are they not just going to exacerbate existing problems in other places, and also not take the more direct route, but take more circuitous routes, which is an unsustainable result? Sorry, sir. Then I had a second point, which was related to the point that was made, by Mr. Wilde, about assessment of alternative spatial distribution strategies. I just wanted to make the point that the sustainability assessment of the sustainability appraisal of the local plan does cover transport aspects, but that sustainability appraisal is based upon a report which was done in 2007. And in 2007, the amount of growth that was proposed for Maidstone was probably 10,080 new dwellings, or at the most 11,080 new dwellings. So we're talking about a level of growth which is potentially 90% now greater than was covered by that sustainability appraisal. And I have got to say that sustainability appraisal was incredibly superficial.
That's good enough.
Mr. Hughes is talking about VISM potentially underestimating flows at given locations. I would say that the flows presented in Appendix C, they are a snapshot at a single location. On the face of it, the number may appear anomalous, but VISM is a strategic model which tests the impact of various development scenarios. It shows how traffic reassigns across the network and potential locations for travel time delay on the network. But I think I would go back to what Mr. Lulham said about really it can highlight areas where you focus attention on doing more detailed modelling. And in that more detailed modelling, which has been independently assessed by Mott MacDonald, I mean, that, as Mr. Lulham has said, that's taken into account higher flows, based on the cumulative impacts of individual transport assessments, undertaking detailed modelling using the industry standard LINSIG, Arcady and Picardy tools. And I think VISM, we shouldn't, VISM can tell us where the problems are, but we've done the detailed modelling, we've done the cumulative modelling using more detailed tools, the sort of tools that you would use typically to assess the impacts of individual applications. We've done that. The methodology is found to be robust. And the outputs show that the development, the effect of the impact of the developments on the network can be fully mitigated.
Okay. Right, I'm going to have to move on, I'm afraid, because I think there are there's quite a bit still to get through on related matters, and I'm going to 12.14. There's refers to a series of representations made by a number of people in relation to policy DM24. And I say that many representatives rely on the Kent County Council position in their representations with similar conclusions just about the severe congestion impact and the representations from, I say, those who would support Leeds Langley Relief Road, and concerns about the increased rat running on the narrow lanes, I think particularly between the A274 and the A20. Other representations talk about the versus overcapacity, poor bus service, reduction in the park and ride services, concerns over noise and air pollution from traffic, so the Joint Parishes Group, and from seeking specific improvements to specified junctions, including Linton Crossroads. Say inadequate provision has been made for safe cycle routes, as was Ketley. And Mr Baker seeks additional parking provision at Bearsted Station and improvements to the five-way junction in association with allocation H110. Okay. Now, the question I asked at 12.14 is whether any specific changes to policy DM24 are sought, which were sought in their original representations, which they need to make that policy sound. So DM24 is a sustainable transport policy. And is this one of the policies which is being split into strategic and non-strategic policies? I think it might be. The thing is, because I mean, most of the first part of the policy is about what the borough and the will do in relation with its partners. So it's mostly about action for the council before it gets on to the actual part about what's required for development proposals. So that which comes in kind of part 3 of the policy, what development proposals are expected to do.
Yes, sir. With DM24, it's to remove criteria 1 and 2, merge with DM25 criterion 1 to form a new strategic policy in Chapter 4.
Let's see. Okay.
and to merge criterion 3 with DM5 criterion 2, and that's to be renumbered as DM24 on sustainable transport.
Okay, so I think they're essentially just changes in what's described as strategic and non-strategic policy, and without significant changes to the actual policies themselves.
Wording.
Yeah, the wording
Correct.
stays pretty much the same. Okay. Okay. Mr. Baker, you had some. One of your representations is mentioned here, R19241. Is that? You just want to expand a bit on that and ask the council to do that specifically. This is about seeking additional parking provision at Bearsted Station and improvements to the five-way junction.
Thank you very much, sir. So you have my statement lodged in response to the Regulation 19 plan on the 18th of March. In regard to those matters, I won't repeat them. It seems to me that the matters that I raised are most appropriately dealt with by amendments to the policies in question rather than specifically to DM24. I trust you'll forgive me, sir. I'm not familiar with the latest proposed modifications that the Council has put forward, which have just been outlined. Mm-hmm. I would, by your leave, perhaps submit a note of any change that I would suggest to that policy. But on these two particular points, which relate to a particular allocation H131 and to a particular allocation H110, I think I was seeking for amendments to be made to those allocations. In particular, it seems to me inappropriate probably to allocate the whole of H131 and then to have a generic policy that suggests that some of the allocation might be nibbled away for a different purpose in a different policy. The points that I made at point 3 of my statement in relation to Bearsted Station car park have not, as far as I'm aware, sir, been answered because I have not seen the modelling which I requested on the 30th of October last year from the Council and requested again in my statement on the 18th of March. I have not seen the modelling behind the suggestion that a mere 10 spaces additional at Bearsted Station would suffice. I have used that station myself on and off for many, many years, dating right back to when I was at school in Bearsted. And I know that that station car park is completely inadequate. It has been for ages. And people park in the roads around. I have grave doubt that 10 spaces would deal with those who happen to park in the roads around. And I explained in my statement why the Thameslink 2018 project, which is now just round the corner, is likely to further increase commuting from that station. So I think that an amendment to the policy H131 would be appropriate, and I apologise that I haven't had time to word that. In regard to H110 and 5 ways, sir, again, I think that an amendment to H110 would be appropriate, but I apologise that I haven't been able to word that, and in fact I've probably not been aware of exactly where that has got to in the current iteration of proposed modifications either. So apologies, I don't have wording to put before you today, sir.
Can I ask, is there a scheme proposed for Five Ways Junction as well? Is that? There's no scheme, right? Mm-hmm.
Nothing specific, no.
Nothing.
I think there was an old...
This is the junction by Langley, is it? Yes, yeah.
I think certainly in the 1990s, the Leeds-Langley bypass was almost split into two, a sort of major Leeds-Langley bypass, and then a small section around Five Wents.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I think I've seen. Yeah, well, the 2000 local plan had a route in, didn't it, which is kind of clung to the edge of the villages who went up to the side, but yes, would have dealt with that. Mr. Taylor Maggio, this is obviously your patch.
Yes, it is. And it is an extremely dangerous junction and one that takes a huge amount of traffic and should be remodelled. The remodelling would have to include reciting of housing around it as well. So I think that's why it's probably not been done so far, because there is housing at that junction. So it would be a significant job, but it is a very dangerous junction, probably one of the most dangerous in Maidstone, I'd say.
If I may, sir, that was the reason why I put that forward, because I'm aware of not only the bottleneck problem there, but also the danger and the accident record at that junction. And that's why I think it would be appropriate for something to be put forward by the Council to address that. Thank you, sir.
Because it gets caught up then in consideration of Leeds Langley Relief Road, doesn't it? Because that's, the function of that junction would change somewhat if a relief road was built with a junction somewhere else. Yeah,
Indeed, sir, but I understand the Council's position to be that H110 can go ahead when they get round to finalising a Section 106 agreement and deciding what's to be done about granting permission or not, without any reference to a Leeds Langley bypass, which we heard a few minutes ago couldn't be in place before 2027.
Yeah.
So there's a need to address the issue for the next 10 years, sir, even if assuming, of course, that H110 remains in the plan.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Right. And of course, H110, we've got the resolution to permit on that already, so it might only be able to be brought into play even if it was a condition of that, if it had to be redetermined for some reason. Or
from memory, I'm pretty sure that the cumulative transport assessment looked at the junction we've just been talking about, and it didn't justify the need for it to be the subject of monies from a Section 106. And I don't recall Kent County Council Highways highlighting the need to improve it either.
Okay. Right. Okay, that's that one. In the Bearsted Station matter, I mean, Bearsted Station was one of the H110 supposing to help fund a bus link to that station. Is that the case? Yeah. But the provision in relation to the parking is as suggested, there's the 10 spaces in the...
Yeah, we think that's proportional.
It actually says a minimum of 10 spaces, but...
What does that mean, sir?
This is in relation to because this is the H131 Bearsted Goods Yard proposal for 20 dwellings. It's an average density of 40 dwellings per hectare, so presumably it's half a hectare site. And the proportionality is in relation to what the number of dwellings or the site size or what that development could support, is it?
Yeah, it's mainly the site size. It's a constrained site, and obviously there's the train station building itself and the railway line, which plus getting 20 houses and.
So when you say proportion, you mean proportional to the scale of the site and the development, rather than proportional to the number of people using the station, or.
Both in terms of proportional to the site area and the constraints, and also going back to the test of 106 yet again, in relation to 20 dwellings being proposed. And obviously it's 10 in addition to the existing Network Rail car park.
People in the dwellings won't be using the car park because they'll be... Yeah. They can walk to the station.
Yeah, and there's a reasonableness test as well.
Okay. Right. Okay, so it may well be desirable to have more parking space, but the difficulty is actually achieving it as part of that development. Mr. Baker.
Thank you, sir. With respect to Mr. Jarman, the question is not proportionality to the number of dwellings to be built on the site, for the very reason that you say, sir. The question is paragraph 41 of the National Planning Policy Framework, which requires local planning authorities to identify and protect, where there is robust evidence, sites and routes which could be critical in developing infrastructure to widen transport choice. We've heard a lot about transport and the need to achieve a modal shift today. And the need to enable people to use the train rather than driving for their entire journey is very important in developing any modal shift that's likely to arise. So my contention is that it may be that the Council has done an analysis of where the number of 10 spaces came from. I haven't gathered what it's proportional to, even today, but I haven't seen that evidence. So I don't know whether you have, but I'm not aware that it's in the evidence base. It seems to me from the evidence that I put in my statement relating to what we know about the growth in train travel at various stations around Kent, that even if we were dealing solely with the existing situation, 10 spaces more than we currently have is not likely to be remotely adequate, let alone when the Thameslink 2000 programme comes along 18 years late in 2 years' time. So, sir, I think the position that I would put forward is that H131 is not justified in allocating 20 dwellings on what is the sole remaining piece of railway land around that station that could ever be used for parking or indeed cycle parking or taxi drop-off or any other use associated with the station. Until that question has been resolved, it's inappropriate to designate a particular number of dwellings until there has been proper consultation, sir, under the duty to cooperate with the Office of Rail Regulation. I'm not aware whether the Council has done that, but the Office of Rail Regulation is one of the bodies that they are required to consult with under the duty to cooperate. I don't know whether they've consulted the train operator or with Network Rail either, and although those are not duty to cooperate bodies, it might be sensible to take their view on what the future patronage demand is likely to be at Bearsted once there is a 4 train per hour service from Maidstone East. I've set out in my statement why that should not necessarily result in everybody driving to Maidstone East to catch it, but it can be expected that people will get on the train at Bearsted and change onto the direct line at Maidstone East, because that's what happens at Wye. We've seen that happen since high-speed trains began from Ashford. Patronage at Wye has increased hugely. It hasn't just resulted in abstraction and people driving to Ashford. So, sir, I say that the policy put forward is not justified by evidence until that evidence can be produced, and perhaps the Council's in a position to enlighten you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, do you want to respond?
2 points. Bearsted's train station is available for people who wish to travel on foot, and we wish to encourage that. There's unless I've got this wrong, I thought there was a bus stop outside the train station. So I think it's very sustainably located. This site has got quite a planning history. I dealt with an application, I think, roughly 15 years ago. And we've been in a position where we've been encouraging residential development at the station. And at the same time, we've been having talks with Network Rail and South East Rail and the previous franchise about improving parking at the station. But I go back to the fundamental point that it is a constrained site in terms of getting in extra spaces for rail users.
Yeah. I think what Mr. Baker's suggesting is that the whole site should be given over for parking. Is that the...
Sir, I think that is likely to be the case, but I wouldn't suggest that an allocation be made for parking without evidence, because fundamentally policies should be justified by evidence. I'm interested to hear that Mr. Jarman refers to discussions with the train company 15 years ago. We know that patronage of trains in this county and in the country has increased by about 50% in that period of time. And we see more and more people driving to stations, which ultimately is better, sir, than driving the entire way excuse me, to their destinations. So, sir, I still think there is a lack of justification. If there is enough room on the site to fit in 20 dwellings, there must be room for at least another 40 parking spaces, even if they're very large cars, sir.
If I might just add as well, the site was submitted by Network Rail, specifically for housing, was assessed under the SLAR. So what we've sought to do here is, take the opportunity to provide additional car parking spaces to serve the station.
Okay, well, we've heard both sides of that. Ms. Cooling, did you make representations about Bearsted in station? Right.
The coordinating team won't have a particular view on any particular site, but what Mr. Baker has said sounds dangerously like strategic thinking of a joined-up nature. And we would thoroughly applaud that throughout this plan. I don't know the site well, but I know the site, and given the topography of the site, if I remember correctly, there may be even the possibility of two-level parking there without damaging visual impact. So I applaud what Mr. Baker has said. Joined up strategic thinking, and British Rail, Network Rail, need to be told to think again on land usage. Could another of our coordinating team who actually lives opposite make any comment or not?
No, I think
you've had enough.
I think we've had a proportionate amount of discussion on
One point of interest, as it was mentioned about buses,
yes.
There is no bus service. So when I travel up to London regularly from Bearsted, I live in Langley, there is no bus service from Langley to Bearsted.
That's what's being proposed, so that's part of the H110.
At the moment,
yes.
there is
yes.
no
yes,
bus service.
Yes, but there will be, so there was something for Langley residents to use.
Mr. Inspector, there is a serious point
yes.
that my colleague has just brought to my attention. I now understand that, in fact, that site is the only access to the railway between Ashford and Swanley for heavy goods vehicles, for heavy maintenance work on that stretch of line. So I think Network Rail, if that is correct...
Obviously, Network Rail know that, I imagine.
Yes, but I do suspect there is another branch of Network Rail which gets credit for every bit of land sold for development. So they may need to be reminded they need to think strategically.
Okay, I just want to deal with some specific wording changes which the coordinating team were seeking to DM24.
Cannot argue their soundness arguments.
Right. Okay. Okay. So
I'm willing to save your time on that.
Okay. I'll move on then. DM25, public transport. Whether policy DM25 is justified, effective, and consistent with national policy. So I've heard there's going to be some rejigging of merger of that with parts of DM24, but it's essentially, I think we can look at the wording as it is now. The particular issue here is that the County Council was seeking the removal of references and various points in the text of the plan, particularly at 17.13, paragraph 17.139 and also 17.127, to bus priority measures, including on A274 Sutton Road. Now, I've had some discussion on that already today, and the let's have a look. What's the word? Okay, so 2.2. Right. The first measure that they're seeking is that whereas DM25 Roman 1 refers to bus priority measures at junctions, the County Council would ask that to be modified to bus priority measures at junctions where appropriate. I'm not sure that adds very much because, I mean, presumably you're not proposing bus priority measures at every junction. There has to be some that would need to be justified in each case. I mean, particularly if you're seeking Section 106 contributions to them, you have to say why they would be needed. So I can't see they're going to be put forward unless they're considered where appropriate. So what does that add?
Well, the point we're trying to make is that a uniform approach to bus priority is not the right way to go about it. It needs to be assessed on a case-by-case basis. Mm-hmm. And such measures should only be brought forward where there are clear benefits and where the consequential effects to other road users don't outweigh the benefits. So it's very much case by case.
Well, it is, but I think it's case by case in either event. I mean, it's suggesting that it's just one of the measures that could be included at the moment as to improve during times and reliability, make public transport more attractive and so on. So it's one of several different proposals there, but I can't see that inappropriate bus priority measures are going to be introduced, and the County Council has the final determination on this in any event if it works in the highway. So I don't see that adds anything to what it already says. The other points on that, though, were that let's have a look. Okay. Right. Yeah, so 1216 is on the same point, isn't it? Essentially. So the other point, the matter you are seeking is that any reference to bus priority measures be removed from supporting text at 17.139, I think. Item 17.139 says bus priority measures will be provided in order to encourage the use of public transport by seeking to ensure the reliability and frequency of service will continue to be made more accessible to all users. So it's a kind of, in principle, support for bus priority. And then 17.127 has a list of measures of key improvements, one of which is bus prioritisation measures on the A274 road from the Willington Street Junction to the Wheatsheaf Junction, together with bus infrastructure improvements. I think, as I said earlier, that the SPS and the Strategic Planning Policy Committee didn't support bus priority, but apparently they've approved some text which does. So, there's also reference in TM25 to bus prioritisation within traffic management schemes and other enhanced facilities. Okay, so one of the questions asked in my letter to the Council the weekend was in relation to this matter and the evidential basis for saying that they weren't introduced bus priority on the 274. This is despite the fact that there are three Section 106 obligations previously entered into for sites on Sutton Road, which related to I think there's a number of matters which supported those, which were including the current local transport plan and the local plan, both of which were in line with that. So the sums of money have been set out in Section 106, and some of it has already been paid to the County Council. The County Council is saying they won't implement that. Well, they won't implement that at all, but there's a general point. They won't implement schemes if they would disadvantage other road users. So the reasons why the Council is giving now Yes, I'm just trying to find the letter at the moment. It's got buried. Right. Right, so I asked what the evidential basis was for saying that other road users will be disadvantaged by this scheme. They refer to the A274 corridor study, which is provided by the Borough Council, as document TRA 28. It says, as well as experience some other bus priority schemes within the county. And they say that the bus priority of this location is not only based upon whether it would disadvantage other road users, but also on a wide range of other factors, which could have not been fully considered or investigated. Just on the A274 corridor study, I think my understanding is that wasn't just an A274 corridor study, because it also studied part of the A229 north of the Wheatsheaf. And I think that includes different or additional schemes to that which the Section 106 agreements were referring. The Section 106 agreements only refer to bus lane on Sutton Road itself. And that which, as I understand it, will be achieved by partially widening Sutton Road, but also by just realigning space within the existing carriageway. So you still have two lines of traffic in and out, but you have an additional lane for buses. Once you get past the Wheatsheaf and you get into the A229 north of the Wheatsheaf, then to put bus lanes in there does actually mean reallocating lanes, presumably from other traffic to bus use. And that's where you lose capacity. I couldn't see how you lose capacity on Sutton Road. Is that okay?
That's correct. Between Willington Street and the Wheatsheaf, I mean, the proposals consist of localised widening within the highway boundary, and the two running lanes for general traffic are maintained, and the extra road space is allocated to buses to protect their journey time reliability, and pre-signals are provided prior to the Willington Street junction and prior to the Wheatsheaf junction, basically to allow buses to overtake the queue of general traffic. The only delay to general traffic is when the bus actually overtakes that queue. So the maximum impact on general traffic would be an approximation of 2 cars per signal cycle. And when you compare that with the loading of buses, which is already high on that well-patronised bus route, there's a positive benefit to the intervention. The proposals do not affect the capacity of the junctions themselves. They merely lock in a certain amount of road space for the reliability of buses. They do not adversely affect general traffic. In fact, by enabling reliable bus services, that is one of the key elements to encouraging modal shift, the reliability of bus services. It would give the main bus operator the confidence to invest in the cleanest new vehicles, which would contribute towards, with modal shift, contribute towards noise and air quality improvements on the corridor. And by encouraging certain motorists out of their cars to use the bus service, it would benefit those who remain in their cars. So I see this as an entirely positive scheme with no significant disbenefits to motorists whatsoever.
The other points of the County Council was saying that they acknowledge that it provides some level of benefit, they say, to bus passengers, but because the proposals don't cover the entire route to the town centre, they don't offer significant benefits in terms of door-to-door journeys, which would help to encourage significant modal shift from car to bus. I mean, if the bus being able to pass a queue of traffic to get to the Wheatsheaf traffic lights, you say that doesn't provide a significant benefit in journey times. That suggests it doesn't take very long to get down Sutton Road by car. You know, surely if the bus can get to the head of the queue, and the queue, you're talking about the waiting time in that queue, there must be a significant benefit to the bus users.
The issue here being, sir, that obviously, yes, as we acknowledge in the response to your question, there would likely be some benefit to bus travel, at least on the A274, but you've already heard of the congestion issues on the A229 at those key junctions and into the town centre from there. And so you're effectively gaining some benefit for a part of a leg of a journey, but then those bus travellers are sat in the same queue as general traffic into the town centre. And so it's a negligible benefit in terms of their entire journey.
This is one of the things. Was it 3 high-frequency routes in Maidstone?
Yeah, I think the number 82 service is the most popular service in Maidstone.
And it's already more than, is it more than 10-minute frequency or something like that? Down to 8 minutes frequency. Okay. There's mention earlier about the frequency will be less through the new development. Is that the case?
Yeah, because originally what's been envisaged following discussions with Arriva, they've come up with a sort of a package of measures, and part of it is a new service, an 83, which links to the H110 sites, which would go straight to Maidstone East, which would be a brand new service coming forward, and those are developing as we're coming forward. With regard to the 82, that would continue. It's a very popular service.
So just go to Parkwood then and turn around?
Yeah, it goes round to Parkwood and then turns around and goes back. So, yeah, but in terms of the discussions we're having with Arriva, they are looking at new services to link in straight to Maidstone East, and obviously with the Thames Link coming forward from there. So, you know, there's a lot of work going on the bus infrastructure scheme.
Okay. Another thing Council said was that because the type of dwellings being developed were mostly typically 3- and 4-bedroom houses, they're likely to attract a certain demographic, will have high car ownership and therefore be less inclined to travel by bus. I mean, it isn't the case that the 3- or 4-bedroom houses are most popular with families, and families have school children, and school children tend to travel by bus. I mean, from what I've seen from in fact, I was looking at the buses this morning, just on the section road, and it seemed to me that a pretty high proportion of all the bus passengers in the peak hour are going to school. You know, one of the reasons why you've got the modal split there is currently is that small portion of people seem to be mostly children going to school. Mr. Reid.
Can't give you the specific percentages, but the school run is one of the biggest impacts on the traffic levels in this town and probably every other town in the United Kingdom. There's primary school children, certainly not. They're not using the buses in any significant proportion.
But then they're going close to home normally.
Yes, indeed. What I would like some help with, it's my turn to be confused, is that it's my understanding that neither authority is in favour of widening the A274. I thought that Maidstone's SPST, at its meeting in December 15, resolved to delete the words widening of the inbound carriageway of the A274 Sutton Road between Wallace Avenue and Lees Road from the interventions in the draft ITS. And has that changed?
Sorry, we're talking specifically about the policy, DM25.
Well, I mean the text. The policy talks about priority in traffic management and bus priority at junctions, and the text talks about is more specific to Sutton Road. Bus priority on Sutton Road.
Okay, just with DM25, Roman numeral 1 of criterion 1. Obviously, the bus prioritisation wouldn't be literally just at the junctions themselves. It would be just before and after. So there would be almost like bypasses for the bus to get ahead of the queue. Where it gets more complicated is with the existing Section 106 monies that are with Kent County Council, and further monies expected when the housing developments that are being built now and the police headquarters get built out. There's more flexibility on how the monies could be spent in terms of bus prioritisation with those Section 106 agreements.
But what is it? Because the text at 17.127 says bus prioritisation measures on the A274 Sutton Road from the Wellington Street junction to the Wheatsheaf junction, together with bus infrastructure improvements. I mean that sounds like a bus lane to me. And I think that's what these agreements sound like as well.
Yeah. We can look at the wording again, but certainly Maidstone members do not want to see what they've described as a continuous bus lane. However, Maidstone is committed to improving public transport, and it's primarily about improving, getting past junctions quicker for buses so that they become more reliable.
It doesn't help very much getting past a junction quicker if you can't get to the head of the queue where the junction is.
Yes, it is. But, I mean, to my mind, you see them all around the country, but they still help. Yes, of course, a continuous bus length, a lane of a kilometre, would help even more.
And why don't Maidstone members want a bus lane?
I think it's environmental impact of the bus lane, because it's in the public highway, in that when the bus lane was proposed, we had detailed drawings undertaken. It was loss of some of the verge, the grassed verge. And my understanding is the environmental cost of losing the majority of that grass verge was too much.
Ms. Hughes.
Thank you, sir. It does seem to me, and we've just touched on it, that there is an inconsistency between some of the parts of policy DM24 and the policy DM25 that we're talking about. We've already covered the uncertainty relating to the A274 bus lane. What about the A229, which is going to have a lot of new development accessing onto it, but there is no room, as far as I can see, to put a bus lane or bus priority measures, and yet the policy in DM24 to Roman 7 is a policy to increase bus service frequency along the radial routes into the town centre. Well, how are they going to do that on the A229? And if they don't do that, then how are they going to get modal shift with all that new development? Surely people will just continue to use their cars, and that will put even more pressure on an already overloaded and overcapacity junction. And the second point, if I may, just going on from that, is that, and the point that I did mention earlier about increasing bus patronage, I do think is very optimistic. And I think that was also pointed out by Amy in one of their reports. Because if you look at the figures in the VISM modelling, then they do indicate, if you take the assumption of an increase in bus usage from 11% in 2014 to 16% under the Do Something 4B, in 2022, they do imply an increase of 64% in bus ridership in the AM peak in that period. And as I understand it, in terms of the 2001 census and the 2011 census, bus ridership in that period has actually decreased. So I failed to see...
Sorry, so in this area you say it's decreased?
Yes, yeah. So I fail to see how some of these policies are consistent with paragraph 154 of the NPPF, which requires them to be realistic. And I don't see that they are realistic.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, sir.
I think, Mr. Lilling, you're saying that your modelling did not assume that increase in bus patronage.
No, sir. We, as I said, we maintain the existing mode share in our work. That's the industry standard way of preparing transport assessments, unless you agree an alternative set of assumptions with the Highway Authority. We didn't take that approach in this case because we wanted the most robust and worst case assessment as a starting point. However, we are proposing and negotiating through the Section 106 process in regard to H110 significant bus service improvements. I think the new Route 83 service has been mentioned, and we're looking at the feasibility of other routes to school and railway stations. I would also note, sir, and then just touch upon your letter to the Highway Authority on the 13th of November, that the NPPF in Section 4 does talk about balancing or rebalancing the transport system in favour of sustainable transport modes, and it seems that, in a way, the Highway Authority is cutting off its nose to spite its face in terms of objecting to development on the A274 corridor on the basis that the highway mitigation is not deliverable, whilst at the same time resisting attempts to rebalance the network in favour of sustainable modes. It feels like a bit of an impasse there, which it doesn't seem to sit well with national guidance in this area.
Okay, Ms. Goodenough.
Just to add to Mr. Ludham's point, I mean, the A274 bus prioritisation this is an ideal opportunity to promote sustainable transport modes, as identified in the NPPF, which would be missed if, on the basis of evidence I can't quite fathom, a severe impact on general traffic. But achieving modal shift from car to bus prioritisation is one element of achieving that, but it's also about improving frequencies. It's about better buses. It's about comfy leather seats. It's about Wi-Fi. It's about flexible, attractively priced ticketing products, so cashless ticketing. It's making it easier to use. When you're travelling by bus, you can make use of your time when you're travelling to somewhere. It's all elements of the bus offer which can be improved, and there are countless examples elsewhere in the southeast of England where that has happened. I mean, more locally, you think of Fast Track with the onboard Wi-Fi and PowerPoints. You think of the Sapphire service from Gillingham to Maidstone, which has gone from half-hourly to now 12 minutes with an aspiration to go to 10. And that's without bus priority interventions here. But so there is evidence locally that bus patronage can be increased without bus prioritisation. But to get the real step change, to get the real reliability step change, you do need bus prioritisation to be delivered. And on this section of corridor, it is deliverable. So this is, I think I'll end my point there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Whittaker, yeah.
Thank you, sir. Just picking up on a couple of points there. Obviously, Mr. Ludham talking about sustainable travel. It's rather ironic given the unsustainable location of H110, which is firm are promoting, which is some, I believe, 3 miles outside of the town centre, which preclude walking and cycling for a start. But going back to the bus
Preclude cycling, say?
Pardon?
Say preclude cycling as well, 3 miles, you say? That's too far. Okay.
Beyond the 5 kilometres sort of recommended distance, sir.
Okay.
And going back to the bus priority in the report that Mark MacDonald have prepared, I mean, Mr Goodenough touched on a few issues there. What it does do, it looks at the a high-level theory and estimates of benefits on a small section of the route into the town centre. But fundamentally, it doesn't look at a whole raft of other issues, some of which, actually, ironically, Mr Goodenough's just touched on, but the need for complementary improvements to waiting facilities and information provision. Can the town centre bus station, in fact, accommodate these additional bus frequencies that are being proposed? We've seen no consideration of the bus fare pricing structure and whether these are commercially viable. No reference to a complementary parking strategy. Fundamentally, the modelling, the VISM modelling that's been undertaken, the modal shift 2 bus is an output from the model, but much of that is forced by the increase in long-stay parking prices in the town centre, which has an effect to push people towards bus travel. Certainly there's no sort of detailed cost-benefit analysis has been undertaken in terms of the bus priority measures. And furthermore, the proposals potentially undermine the other capacity improvements that are also indicated in the ITS, i.e. the capacity improvements at the Wheatsheaf and Armstrong Road, which are currently being investigated.
Why would it undermine capacity improvements at the Wheatsheaf? Assuming the bus lane would stop where it does now before you get to the Wheatsheaf. I mean, there is a bus lane already for past that section, leading up the junction, but you're extending it back from that down Sutton Road.
Well, as I understood, there was some continuation onto the A229.
Well, that's the thing, as well as the pains to divide, the A274 corridor study proposed that continuation in A229, and that's where you start to get some of the capacity issues. The 274, the one that's mentioned in the plan, between the Wheatsheaf and the Willington Street, doesn't mention those, and neither do the Section 106 obligations.
The report makes quite clear that the bus prioritisation can be implemented in phases. But I just want to come back on Mr Whittaker's point about the distance from South East Maidstone to the town centre. It's a fundamentally sustainable location, 5.5 kilometres to the town centre. Very conservatively speaking, a half-hour bike ride. There is a commitment, fully funded package of walking and cycling improvements to connect with existing very good quality cycle routes, walking routes into the town centre. And it's not just the town centre that are key destinations, it's the Morrison's Superstore and other places. Where it is a sustainable urban extension. It gives people a genuine choice of modes. And it links into existing opportunities. It gives people a realistic choice of modes, which are more, a spatial distribution relying on freestanding developments, car-reliant developments, just simply would not provide. So what we've done here, we've got a fully funded package of bus prioritisation improvements, a fully funded package of walking and cycling interventions, improvements to bus stops. We're talking with Arriva about live information. We're talking about improvements to buses. A 20-minute service is being talked about to Maidstone East, linking in with the new Kent Thames Link rail service, giving people a genuine choice of making long-distance journeys without having recourse to the car whatsoever. We're talking about bus links to Headcorn and Bearsted stations. We're talking about an overall combined frequency of buses of 11 buses an hour on the A274, a bus every 5 or 6 minutes. We are giving people a real choice of modes. And they talk about demographics, but there are countless examples elsewhere in the southeast of England of where a step change in bus quality has been achieved and attracted people to make bus a mode of choice. The reason it's not a mode of choice at the moment in Maidstone is because of the lack of support from Kent County Council for sustainable transport. We're talking about bus priority being we're talking about uniformly bus priority at junctions where appropriate, but from the wording that was suggested, there just seems to be a presumption against sustainable transport improvements anywhere. So I just need to see the evidence for KCC's position.
Okay. Can I just make an aside as well as to another aspect, which is the air quality argument? Because there's been lots of talk about the capacity of roads and how many vehicles you can get down the roads and so on, and what effect it has on congestion, etc. We're in a situation where we already have an air quality management area across the whole town, and we have air quality exceedance areas, including at the Wheatsheaf junction. Now, it seems that if you're talking about the effect of motor transport, you've only got two options. Either you have a major shift in propulsion, so that everyone moves to electric cars, or at least from diesel to petrol or whatever, to get some improvement with the existing levels of traffic or the growing levels of traffic, or you have modal shift. And I'm looking to see what you have to do. I mean, or if Kent County Council has it, is how you can improve air quality in Maidstone, what the strategy is to do that in relation to road transport. Because it's an existing problem, regardless of what happens about new developments. Is there a solution to that which doesn't involve either fewer cars or some sort of shift which can't be achieved only at local level to different forms of propulsion or emissions?
May I comment?
Well, it's a question I put to the County Council first. Cause
well, in answer to that, so it's the strategy to improve air quality is the same as the strategy to improve transport provision, because effectively that's what our function is as a statutory highway authority. So as far as the period up to 2022 concerned, you've heard what our views are, notwithstanding the issues around the south and south-east sector. What we hope to develop beyond that is a strategy to 2031 that will assess all the options, not just the provision of a link road around a particular pair of villages in the south-east sector, but for the whole of that particular part of the town. We won't be restricting our analysis to the simple provision of a road. As I think it was either Rob or James made the point earlier on about the sustainability appraisal that would be needed. We'd have to look at the options. And we're not ruling public transport out from that. The point is, at the moment, is that we're not convinced that just putting forward these piecemeal measures on bus priority is actually the answer, given the propensity for public transport usage as it is now and the exceptionally high levels of car ownership in the town.
Okay, so waits until the local plan review 2022. Okay. I'm just looking at the time. I think that we're probably not going to get to the infrastructure section unless today, and because we've still got some matters to cover here. So that's just a warning that I think. Just check what's left. Well, we may manage it, but so I won't go into that completely. But I think we need to have a break now because we've been going since 2 o'clock. So if we just take a break until 25 past, we've still got some matters relating to Park and Ride and well, that may be the only. Yes, I think because we've covered some of the matters in the next couple of questions, that may be only one. So just adjourn until 25 past. Okay, if we can resume then, please. Right, I think given the time and because we need to clear this room at 5 o'clock, I'm afraid we're going to have to defer the infrastructure part of the agenda and we'll consider that instead next Wednesday afternoon. That's on the Wednesday, the 23rd of November. So I'm sorry for those who've come specifically for that. Right, there's just a couple of points still on the bus party measures. In its written statement, sorry, I'll say something else. I know people have been asking about that they can't see documents and so on the screens. And unfortunately, there's technical problems with these screens for the last week or two. And although they were working at the start of the examination, we haven't been able to get documents up on them since, or the screen behind me. So, referring to the Council's written statement in response to this is question 1220 one now, which is talking about bus party measures, if they're not introduced, how else can traffic impacts be adequately mitigated? But, well, it isn't specifically relevant to that question, but the response was put into that question. And the Borough Council says it's secured some £4 million now through Section 106 planning obligations towards the delivery of bus prioritisation measures to increase the level of modal shift. So is that? I think when I tried to tot up the previous Section 106 schemes, I think it's about £2.5 million or something from that, isn't it? And then the other £1.5 million comes from the current proposals, is it?
Yes, sir. I think the helpful table is that apportionment table. It was just an illustrative table that was put up. I think it's part of submission G as part of today's evidence. But the table sets out exactly where the money comes from. And the IDP allocates 2.7 million onto the bus infrastructure provision, and the schemes seek to meet that provision, the 2.7 million in full. Likewise, in terms of the prioritisation issue, in conjunction with the money that KCC also hold of the 2.47 million, the shortfall of 1.5 is also made up, arising from the three schemes that have a resolution to approve.
Now, in the County Council's responses, they've said that they've sought legal advice on what they can use that money for, and they suggest that the legal advice says they don't have to use it, the money for bus prioritisation, the previous Section 106 monies.
So I was at that meeting when that was raised, and we've frequently requested, and it's recorded in the minutes, for KCC to provide the advice that came from, because obviously we bear our relation in terms of 122 requirements of the seal tests, and in terms of they are sort of set out on that provision. So to date, I haven't seen that legal advice.
Yeah, we've sent it several times. I'm happy to send it again. I've got it here. I can read it out. It's from one of John's colleagues, Christopher Lockhart-Mummery. Would you like me to read the concluding paragraph?
Yes, please, yeah.
In summary, it would be lawful for Kent County Council to divert the contributions, these are the three existing Sutton Road 106s that are in the bag, to divert the contributions to a transport purpose other than that anticipated at the time of the unilateral obligations, because, of course, at the time of the unilateral obligations, the intention was for a bus lane, which neither authority now supports, widening the Sutton Road. It would be desirable for KCC to justify, in relatively brief terms, why it's not seen as desirable to expend the contributions on the original purpose. And as Christopher Lockhart-Mummery understands it, it would be desired to divert the contributions towards the ongoing study into different means of resolving present and future traffic congestion. A decision on these lines would be, in his opinion, would meet the tests. And he refers back to a piece of case law which John Hobson here will probably give you more detail on around public law obligations. But in summary, and we have summarised it in our answer to question 6 that you put to us, sorry, question 7, I beg your pardon, on Sunday. It would be perfectly lawful and reasonable for the County Council to spend the funds on a transport purpose associated with mitigating the impact of those developments, Such use would not be prejudicial to the planning permissions which have now been implemented and are impregnable.
Okay, so instead of spending the money directly on mitigating works, you'd be spending it on a study for towards the...
You could do. It could be part of the review, yeah. Yeah.
Does Council want to respond to that?
Useful to have a copy of Mr. Lockhart's Munro's opinion, particularly the question posed of Mr. Lockhart Munro. But the three schemes added up to around about 1,000 houses. So I don't see how using the monies to pay for a study is actually mitigating the impact of those houses which are being built out now on the A274, which I thought KCC Highways this morning had been saying was congested.
So your microphone's not on.
I'll just add to that. So the sealed regs were in place in 2010 when that came forward. When those Section 1 unilaterals were signed.
Can you provide that? So you say you have provided previously, but or you could provide that.
Yes, certainly.
To the,
yeah.
Well, okay. What can you introduce as an inquiry document then, as well as for the council? So.
Yeah, I mean, this is the only one I've got here with me. But if we've got a photocopy, you can do it now if you like.
Okay. Perhaps if it could be passed to the programme officer, then. Yes. Okay. Read. Right, move on to the park and ride matters. The issue was there, it's at issue 4, whether the local plan is the most appropriate strategy in respect to park and ride provision. There are some representations objecting to the lack of past investment in the Maidstone Road network and the termination of the park and ride facility to Clips Park, the abandonment of a proposed park and ride facility to the south of the town, and it seeks that sites for park and ride provision are identified. That's Mr Hillridge. The Joint Parishes Group also objects to the decision to halve the park and ride service. Mr Baker objects to the abandonment of the proposed park and ride site on the A259. The agenda says south of the town, it's actually north of the town, and seeks replacement, even if that would be to the north of the M20. So the question I asked was why the Borough Council has reduced or abandoned park and ride schemes, and would there not be need to take full advantage of any bus priority measures? And the Council in its written response explained that the draft local plan consultation included a park and ride facility at Linton Crossroads, which has been referred to earlier today, and also for increasing the capacity of the park and ride facility to Clips Park near Junction 7. It says the outcome of that consultation was reported to the committee in September 2015, and the committee resolved to consult on the deletion of both those allocations from the local plan. And the reason for the Linton Crossroads site deletion being a negative impact on the character and appearance of the area, particularly from the lighting, which would be on the crest of the scarp slope. And in respect of the Junction 7 site, said representations from the landowner again made it clear the site is not available for the intended use, and this is the site now being proposed for the Waitrose supermarket. Right. There was, I was looking back, I think the 2000 local plan was proposing a park and ride site at Langley Park on the A274, and I think that was considered also in the parking strategy. There were some different ideas about having a park and ride either at that site or at Linton Crossroads, one or both, and says it seemed to conclude that Langley Park site would work if that was the only site.
Yes, you're absolutely right. In 1999, the inspector did admit at the time with the 3 sites which are being built out now, which are in the 2000 local plan, he did make, as ever, a balanced decision. He did realise that the site was a distance from the town centre, and there was congestion then. It was a distance from railway stations. However, what he picked up on, and I feel we picked up on, is that it was a popular service, the number 82 then. As you pointed out earlier, I think it's very important for Maidstone. There's 4 grammar schools plus other secondary schools in and around the town centre, so there's always going to be a demand for bus travel. And the inspector basically said in 1999 to capitalise on that existing popular bus route, hence the bus lane in T2, which would connect up with Park and Ride. Although the Park and Ride, from memory, I'd have to check, I think that was 250 spaces. So as time went by, we have commissioned a number of studies on what is a viable Park and Ride, and forgive me, last time I touched it, it was a minimum of 1,000 spaces, and I think it's often referred to as between 1,000 and 1,500 spaces. But going back to the southeast locationally, we undertook modelling, I think it was about 4 years ago, that showed that, yes, there was a demand from the south, but in order to get to the southeast, to Park Wood, the bus would have to turn right at Linton Crossroads, which I think Mr. Hughes said earlier, is congested. And then on top of that, there's a rural lane, Brushing Lane, which it's difficult to get 2 cars past each other, and the bus would have to... It would be quite a circuitous route to actually get there from the south.
Sorry, from the south, south to... I don't follow where the bus is coming from and to there.
The bus...
I mean, if presumably the site at Langley Park would have been where where one of the housing sites is, I suppose, now.
Where the Taylor Wimpey site is,
using and that was using the 82 service instead of or a dedicated Park and Ride service. Either, whichever.
Yeah, I think...
But then the alternative was Linton Crossroads. Okay.
I think in 1999, when the inspector was looking at the 2000 local plan, I think the idea was journeys down, well, presumably up the A274 from Sutton Valence, Headcorn, etc., out of car, bus to the station. And I think, we as a local planning authority have done further work. I think, and perhaps that's why it was only 250 spaces, the sort of catchment from the southeast, question mark against viability. But there did appear to be much more viability from rather large villages like Staplehurst, Marden, wanting to come up the A229. But the modelling showed that the best location was actually Linton Crossroads, rather than going past Linton Crossroads and to the east to end up at Park Wood. As has been pointed out, there was a lot of objections from residents to Park and Ride, particularly on landscape grounds. There was also reference about not being able to get in a continuous bus lane from the proposed Park and Ride at Linton Crossroads. Whilst I've got the opportunity, with Eclipse Business Park, one of the very pragmatic reasons for the hard decision that Maidstone Borough Council took was the fact that it was on an 18-month lease to Gallagher's, which obviously didn't give us security in terms of, I was going to say long-term planning, but not even medium-term planning. However, as has been pointed out, we still have 2 park and rides. And figures from our parking manager show that patronage of Willington Street, which I think Mrs. Ryden mentioned earlier, have gone up. And the park and ride at Allington, near Junction 5, which has actually got a bus lane along the London Road. That has got a bus lane. The Allington.
It's got a bus lane on London Road, yeah.
Yes, yes. Particularly popular with school children. You know, obviously those 2 park and rides remain. We're investing in those park and rides.
I mean, presumably people would have switched, who were used to using Park and Ride, would have switched from Eclipse Park to the, say, Willington Street, for example. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. The County Council comments said it's unfortunate that the Sittingbourne Road, the Eclipse car park site, is not available and it's reduced travel options. And commenting on the other point of that question, is saying in instances where bus priority measures along the routes may be contemplated, they need to be justifiable and demonstrable benefits to public transport users can be weighed against any disadvantages that may be experienced by other road users. The existence of a dedicated high-frequency park and ride service could influence balance of considerations in this regard, together with the prevailing road conditions that may exist along the road corridor under investigation. Okay. So in relation to then, so the Linton site, they'd say the objections were landscape and the fact you can't have an issue about not having a dedicated bus service from that or bus lane or bus priority from that. And the Langley Park site obviously is now supposed to be allocated for housing. So the only way you could get one at Langley Park, if either you'd have to take some housing away, or you'd be using some of the open space. For example, you know, the natural space that the Langley Parish Council has just talked about. I can't say that there's not any other alternative there. Okay. All right. Points. Okay. I just want to go back a little bit about the local transport plan, because I had also question 12.19, whether the current local transport plan don't plan to support bus priority measures, and there's some reference to what they say about it. But I'm also interested in the emerging local transport plan. There's a number of references to improving public transport in that. There's it's public transport improvements are a future scheme priority for Maidstone. There's reference to the refurbishment of the bus station and bus infrastructure improvements. Bus improvements are listed as a county-wide rail strategic priority. And there's and the outcome of affordable and accessible door-to-door journeys through promoting affordable, accessible and connected transport to enable access for all to jobs, education, health and other services is a key feature of the new transport policy. And another county-wide priority is to provide opportunities to Kent's residents without the need for a private car and therefore reducing road congestion. And the document also talks about the fast-track bus service as exemplary and high-quality bus service. And the Borough Council has provided examples of, from other parts of the country where modal shifts have been achieved, including by use of bus lanes. So it doesn't seem that kind of bus priority or, in fact, any measures to improve public transport are inconsistent with the new local transport plan. And whereas the county has said that limited weight should be given to the current local transport plan on the basis it's going to change, is there actually a change in strategy, or doesn't the new local transport plan also, in line with national policy, seek to promote sustainable transport?
I don't think there's a particular change in emphasis from LTP3 to LTP4. What I hope this demonstrates to you is that we're not sitting up in County Hall with our fingers in our ears, rubbishing public transport. This is about context, it's about benefit, and it's about value for money. And as soon as we can see that there is benefit and value for money in a bus priority scheme, for argument's sake, we'll do it. We've done it in Maidstone, we've done it down London Road, we've done it in Kent Thameside, we've done it in Canterbury. It's about seeing the benefits clearly with an evidence base before we take the plunge and waste a great deal of public money in the process.
Well, it isn't necessarily public money, it's the developers' money, I think that they probably would say. Yeah.
Which has now gone to KCC Highways, but they wish to spend it on a study. Doesn't seem like a commitment at all to public transport.
I think that's probably just about everything. Just quick. Right. Yes, Mr. Hughes.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to start by saying it seems to me that we're in a very strange situation with this plan. We've got a plan which has been put forward by the Borough Council and the Borough Councillors, the transport component of which was very much based on travel demand and modal shift. And yet, we've had the withdrawal from it of the Linton Crossroads Park and Ride site and the proposed bus lane and car sharing lane that would have access to the town centre or improved access to the town centre from that. We've lost the Sittingbourne Road Park and Ride site. Previously, we had lost the Armstrong Road Park and Ride site, which served the south of the borough, which the Borough Council sold for housing and commercial development, I think. So, on the one hand, we seem to have a council which is putting forward a plan, but at the same time, which contains measures to improve bus priority, like the bus lane in Sittingbourne Road, but then deciding against doing it, or a plan which proposes an improvement to the Wheatsheaf roundabout, in essence, I think it's
Wheatsheaf Junction, was that it?
Well, closing Cranbourne, I think it was closing the westbound access to Cranbourne Avenue, which they've now voted against. So they're putting forward a plan, but they're voting against some of the critical infrastructure, transport infrastructure requirements that are required to sustainably implement that plan. And I just, the borough's transport, I think you're the borough's transport consultant, earlier gave us a description of how bus priority would be improved and a whole range of measures, and what effect that could have on the level of service on the A274. But I wonder how that translates to the A229, because for a start, the 2,200 odd houses that are allocated with access to the A229 are further out. There is no continuous cycle route. So what is the level of service if we are going to implement this modal, increasing the modal share of non-vehicular transport? What is the level of service going to be on the A229, may I ask?
I mean, my understanding is there aren't any specific improvements to the sorts the A229 services are there? Or are there?
There are specific improvements to increase frequencies from Staplehurst all the way to Maidstone Town Centre, which have been secured through Section 106 agreements quite recently. So we expect that will have a significant, as set out in the IDP, I would expect that will have a significant beneficial impact to both existing residents and new residents. And just on a wider point, I think it was Mr Hughes earlier mentioned that the local plan should be realistic, not aspirational. In respect of Junction 7, the site is not available. So that is rather realistic of us to base our allocations on the facts.
There's a housing site allocated next to the existing site. There's at Junction 7. We had a session earlier in the hearings about that. Is that where the extension would have gone to the Park and Ride site? I think it wasn't talk about extending the site.
No, the extension had already taken place, but it was supposed to be it was a temporary extension.
Oh.
May I ask what the duration of lease was on that Park and Ride site?
18 months, they said, I think.
No, but when it was initially put in place?
I'd have to check, but unlike the Park and Ride site in Allington, when planning permission was first granted, there was a Section 106 signed so that the Borough Council got the site at a peppercorn rent or a very small amount of money, so it became in our control. However, with Eclipse Business Park, it wasn't the case. The control over the land remained with Gallagher's, and I think it was right from the start. It was an 18-month leasehold. It was a fairly short period of time. I can check the exact history, if need be.
Only reason to ask that is obviously if a strategy is going to be improved to have Park and Ride sites, then it can't be based on short leases.
Mm-hmm. And at the end, the council was paying quite a significant rent for that as well, wasn't they? I think.
Well, absolutely, and like Mr. Thompson said, at the end of the day, the landowner said it wasn't available. There were other uses that had come forward.
So there was quite an investment to get it going as a Park and Ride site on a short lease, and then we had to up stumps and move on.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, absolutely. On that site in particular, we've looked at decking the car park. We've looked at other sites around Junction 7. We've paid for surveyors' reports on compulsory purchasing land on 2 occasions, actually.
Okay. Mr. Wilde.
Thank you, sir. Very interesting discussion. The bus priority matter seems to be a little microcosm possibly of the local plan process, but I think it's being presented as though Maidstone's local plan is built from the foundations as a sustainable plan, and Kent are coming at it as a sort of a looking at it from a car-dominated point of view and don't support sustainable development. I think that's misleading, because the bus priority measures that seem to make this a sustainable plan in Maystone's eyes have been bolted on to a, dare I say, a predetermined spatial strategy. And that's really evident from the fact that we have a spatial distribution of development in locations where bus priority can't realistically be delivered in any tangible form. We've heard today a discussion about, can you have a bus lane on the A274? Well, it's been rejected by Maidstone themselves. It's clearly a constrained environment, and were you to take a step back and look at a spatial distribution strategy with bus priority and bus travel as your core basis of achieving sustainable development, you almost certainly wouldn't end up with this arrangement. And it's evident there are alternative options that, and I won't labour the point about which particular site I'm referring to, that can deliver bus priority in a way that's not detrimental to car travel, but still derives the benefit. Now, that's where you can put bus priority in unconstrained locations. Couple that with the fact that the same sites, we just heard a reference to Mr. Charman about saying that options for alternative park and ride have been explored. Clearly not. At the time that the most recent, or the Regulation 19 local plan was put together, they were well aware of the closure of the Sittingbourne Road Park and Ride, and well aware of another site that was offering park and ride facilities with an allocation along with it, that would have taken full use of bus priority measures and would have delivered significant benefits on one of the known key corridors into the town from the north, from Sittingbourne. The JMP report that was produced some 4 years ago, I believe, forecasted the potential catchment of some 300 to 400 vehicles in a peak hour that could be captured from the A249 corridor. And that's traffic that now progresses south through Junction 7 and progresses further south yet to the town centre. You can imagine the further you go in, the more notable that impact becomes. That evidence is within the local plan evidence base, and yet no effort has been made, seemingly, to explore the option for sites that deliver park and ride.
How many spaces is your proposal considering at Detling?
We've based our proposals on the JMP work that forecasts a potential catchment of 300 to 400. So we're looking at around 400 to 500 to allow growth. I think the most critical thing there is that would be a proposal that would hand over the land, wholesale, constructed, ready to go, with no capital outlay necessary, with no lease, with no capital repayments on interest, which is effectively what crippled the Sittingbourne Road Park and Ride. Add to that the potential journey time savings on the 249. Journey time data that we've looked at sees a potential 15-minute journey time saving for traffic travelling south on the A249 were you to introduce a bus lane, which we proposed, which is a substantial increase in journey time benefit to bus users or park and ride users. More importantly still, it would sit on the 333 corridor, which would allow that park and ride to be used for the duration of the operation of the 333 service. The Sittingbourne Road Park and Ride used to terminate at around 6 p.m, I think, the dedicated bus service. And it was notorious, I think, for people not being able to use it if you didn't leave your office by 5:30 on the dot. So we have a potential to make a far better park and ride service in that location.
So that would be using the regular bus service, not a dedicated service, and
but
I think we heard to going out to 10 minutes. Or
I think both. The 333 service is already proposed to be upgraded to 15-minute service anyway. Irrespective of any development that takes place. There's clearly the scope to increase that further on the back of development, pump priming essentially, and also patronage. And then I think you would have a dedicated park and ride service on top of that. So you could see possibly focusing on the peak out or peak periods. So
that's rather smaller service than the council was saying might be needed to be. It's a rather smaller park and ride car park than the council was just talking about being 1,000 to 1,500 spaces.
Yeah, and I think we have to accept that it picks up one of the catchments that would have served an extended Sittingbourne Road Park and Ride. That had the benefit of picking up the M20. Now, I don't think we would suggest that a site in this location would pick up N20 traffic. It will be focused primarily on the Sittingbourne A249 southbound movement.
Okay. Mr. Court.
Thank you, sir. I act for Hollyridge Services, who have put forward proposals for a park and ride, certainly since the demise of the Linton Crossroads car proposal. I want to start by just looking at the policies. Policy DM26 on park and ride, it purports to be a policy, but it isn't. It's simply a statement of the fact that after several years, there's only 2 park and ride facilities left in Maidstone. There's no reference to new park and ride facilities or criteria for the development of a new one. If you want to see what I call a reasonable park and ride policy is, you need to look at policy DM15 in the Reg 18 policy. In the Reg 18 document, it lists there the 4 park and ride facilities at Sittingbourne Road, London Road, Willington Street and Linton Crossroads. And then it talks about the provision of new or replacement car park and ride facilities should meet the following criteria. DM15 is a reasonable, logical policy for park and rides. What we're left with now isn't even a policy. It's just a statement of what's left over. It makes no reference to new park and ride facilities whatsoever. There's policies DM25 and 24 allude to improvements in public transport and possibly park and rides, but quite honestly, they seem to have been written by separate people who have never spoken to each other because these policies just aren't integrated. And I think Mr. Hughes made that point earlier this afternoon. The fact is, sir, that the Council have been working on this local plan for over 9 years. And if you look at the Park and Ride Policy DM26, you should ask yourself, is that the realistic culmination of 9 years' work? Now, I was looking at the latest statements by the Council on this. It was the Strategic Planning, Sustainability and Transport Committee report of the 14th of June regarding the consultation on the draft Integrated Transport Strategy. And it says, comments on park and ride mostly relate to the need for a replacement facility in the north of Maidstone and also calls for a facility on the southern approach to Maidstone. In the absence of suitable and available sites for such facilities, it is not proposed to make any changes to the ITS. Well, the ITS is a misnomer in any event, sir. It certainly isn't integrated at all. My clients have put forward proposals, but they've been summarily rejected. They've put them forward in the light of the rejection of the proposed Linton Crossroads Park and Ride site. Funnily enough, at a completely separate event, I asked the councillor why Linton Crossroads had been abandoned. And he gave me a very straightforward and a very honest answer. He said, if it didn't work, the site would have to go for housing, and we don't want housing there, therefore we're not going to start off with a park and ride facility. I wasn't quite sure whether to laugh or cry, but that is actually the answer I was given. We've already heard that Maidstone there was a park and ride facility on the south side at Armstrong Road, but again, as Mr. Hughes pointed out, that has been stopped and redeveloped for housing. My clients did put forward proposals for a park and ride. We submitted a pre-application request at the start of this year because we really felt there was a need for one. And I say my client can deliver a 500-space facility at Cripple Street. So we started by putting forward a request for pre-application advice, and it came back 2 months later on the grounds that it would conflict with policy ENV 28, which is the blanket policy from the adopted local plan that had an end date of over 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. It would be incongruous, and it would affect the area of local landscape importance, and the route couldn't accommodate a bus priority lane. As I said, the policy...
So your microphone's gone off.
Sorry, ENV 28 is from the adopted local plan, which is 10 years out of date. it would affect an area of local landscape importance. Well, let's just think of the gradations of landscape in this area. At the top, sir, you've got an area of outstanding natural beauty. We're not going there. The next stage down is a special landscape area. We're not going there. You've then got an area of landscape, local landscape importance, and that's what we're proposing. If the council is worried about the landscape impact, then why did it permit a park and ride in Moat Park, which is parkland of historic importance? Don't get me wrong, sir, I fully favour the park and ride there. Something has to give. There are no easy answers to where park and ride facilities will go. And I support the fact that one went into Moat Park because it is needed, but I would also very much support the fact that one is needed on the south side of Maidstone. It would certainly act to get people out of their cars. It would create more space on the road. I know there isn't a dedicated bus lane, but nor is the one except for 150 yards coming in from Moat Park, Willington Street. It would obviously cut down exhaust gases and relieve parking space in the town. There isn't an easy answer, but it seems that the council, after years and years of trying, have just run away. And if you're looking for an amendment to DM26, so I suggest it allocates my client's site or has criteria which could be adopted. But at the moment, it seems that the Borough Council has simply thrown in the towel whilst talking about improvements to public transport. Those are diametrically opposed, and after 9 or 10 years, we've got a total failure.
Okay. So landscape of local importance, that's the previous local plan. Is it in a landscape of local value or in the new plan?
Can I answer that, sir?
Yes.
The Borough Council commissioned Jacobs to do a landscape assessment. Mm-hmm. They brought their findings to the council. It was my client's site was in the Hale Place area, and it wasn't included in the area of local landscape importance because the Jacobs report was pretty critical of it. However, councillors objected to the exclusion of my client's site and demanded it be put in. So it is in a low area of local landscape value at the behest of non-technical councillors rather than on the advice of professional consultants to the Borough Council.
Okay. Ms. Cooling, we have to close in a moment, but
very
last
quickly
word,
on
yes.
this, if DM26 is going to be amended to include criteria for potential new sites, I would suggest that one criterion is that the council would either have the freehold or a very, 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 very long leasehold on the site.
Okay. Mr. Baker.
Sir, thank you very much. Sir, you'll have seen from my statement that I wish to speak about the A249 corridor, and if I might begin by referring you to the examination document entitled Commuting Patterns 2011 Census, which I'm sorry I haven't noted the number of that, but it is one of the examination documents recently submitted to you, and it sets out the breakdown of boroughs in Kent and, for that matter, London, from which people commute to Maidstone to work. And unsurprisingly, being a double-sized borough, the district of Medway has the greatest number of people commuting to Maidstone to work, followed closely by Tunbridge and Malling, which of course is very close to the town. At least the Malling element of it is almost an extension of this borough. But, sir, the third most common origin of Maidstone commuters is Swale. In other words, the towns of Sittingbourne, Faversham and Sheerness, which none of them have a rail link with Maidstone, or at least not one that would be any use to anybody who isn't on a day out. And there is a very weak bus service from those towns. Currently, the bus service consists of an hourly service from Faversham and an hourly service from Sheerness, which join up at Sittingbourne, conveniently 10 minutes apart. So there's then a 50-minute wait for the next one. So it's very weak at the moment, and it doesn't really offer commuters a satisfactory way to get into Maidstone to work. Beyond that, sir, is the district of Canterbury, where I happen to live, and that also has a large number of people who commute to Maidstone to work. That actually encompasses the towns of Whitstable and Herne Bay, as well as Canterbury. There is a tolerable train service from Canterbury to Maidstone, although it does involve a change at Ashford, which is not particularly convenient because the connections are not very good. But there is no connections by rail from Whitstable or Herne Bay to Maidstone. And effectively, sir, all of those driving, coming from Herne Bay, Whitstable, Faversham, Sittingbourne and Sheerness are effectively going to be needing to drive. And that's one of the reasons why there is a need for a park and ride corridor, particularly targeting the A249 corridor, sir. You will have seen, sir, when you have been up that way, or when you do go up that way, that in the morning peak hour, the situation on Detling Hill and approaching Junction 7 is a complete seized-up queue of traffic, because not only the traffic waiting for Maidstone, but the traffic heading for the M20 is coming down the hill and trying to turn onto the M20 at the bottom of the roundabout. It is common for there to be a 10 or 15-minute queue to get to the roundabout, and of course that's the origin of Mr. Wild's suggestion that a bus lane could give a 15-minute saving in time on that corridor. There is a desperate need, sir, for something to be done about Junction 7. When I drive that way myself, I've calculated that over the last 16 years or so, my journey down Detling Hill takes about 1 minute extra per year, and that's been going on for the last 20 years. So it's quite common to spend 15, 20 minutes waiting at the bottom. All of those cars, sir, include people who would like to use Park and Ride to get into Maidstone. But unfortunately, as we've heard, there is no site which can take them. And I asked in my representations to the Council in October last year what sites they had looked at as alternatives following the disaster over the Gallagher site that we've already heard about, and whether the Council had considered using compulsory purchase powers to secure a site, or for that matter at least safeguarding a site. I've received no reply, and there's nothing, I don't think, in evidence in relation to the sites that they have considered, although if I've missed a document somewhere, I trust I'll be forgiven. So it seems to me that there is an urgent need to do something about Junction 7, and it would be sensible if the Park and Ride site were located to the north of Junction 7, so that the cars heading for it can in fact be removed from the network before they join the M20. Because having queued to get across the M20, there isn't then much reason not to drive on into Maidstone. So I don't know which sites the Council has considered, but it seems to me that a site at the bottom of Detling Hill, opposite Horish Wood, would be an appropriate site, at least to consider. I've no idea about its availability, but I will give you, if I may, its grid reference, as that seems the most appropriate way to indicate it. It's at grid reference 781576, and it's just near, just at the bottom of the A249, with Horish Wood on the other side of the road. So, if I might be bold enough to suggest, if you were to visit Bearsted Station to see whether there is room for a bus from Langley Park to turn round there, you might also perhaps be kind enough to have a look there. But, sir, I'm very concerned
because you're introducing new evidence now which wasn't in your Regulation 19 representation. I don't think you actually mentioned that site before.
No, sir. I was still hoping that the Council would provide details of the sites that they had looked at in their evidence or their submission statements. And I only put that forward as a possibility in the absence of any other evidence. I appreciate that Mr. Wild has put forward another site this afternoon, and no doubt you'll also consider that. So I would seek...
I'm going to have to ask you to bring you to close, because we're going to be kicked out of this room, basically. We're already over time, so if you couldn't conclude quickly.
Yes, sir. In that case, if I might just summarise that there is an urgent need for a site to be provided. I would point out that the sites that serve Canterbury, the park and ride sites there, are at present 600 spaces. Canterbury City Council does not appear to have a requirement for a site being 1,000 or 1,500 to be viable. They've operated with 3 600-space sites for over 10 years now. There are proposals to enlarge one of them to 900, but that's because of increasing demand and increasing house building. The other issue is that they use a dedicated park and ride service between 7 and 7, but in the evening passengers are allowed to use the service bus that goes past the site, and that will take them back to their cars so that they can go home. And I think that's the point that was made earlier about a dedicated service that finishes. And that's another benefit of putting it on a corridor where there is an improved bus service. But finally, sir, in relation to an improved bus service, I see that there is reference in the submissions before you to a master plan group for Junction 7 being convened by the Council. That's at paragraph D49 of their statement. I don't know what that group is, sir. It doesn't appear to be meeting in public or producing any outputs. I don't know what it's intended to do. And there doesn't seem to be any movement on sorting out Junction 7. It seems to rely, sir, on development funding. But the problem with that, sir, is that if people can't get to the Kent Medical Campus to work, companies will not want to locate there, so development will not happen. And it becomes a chicken and egg situation.
Well, that's where some of the money is coming from, that developers of that site.
Indeed, sir, as I understand it, there is a 106, but that only requires the money to be paid at a particular point. Yeah. And my concern is, sir, that Maidstone is rapidly losing its attraction as a business location because of the congestion. And if one looks at the number of people driving to Maidstone to work, particularly at places like Junction 7, the medical campus and around that area, if people have to wait in a queue in the mornings, it's not going to be a particularly attractive place for them to work. And that has resulted, sir, last year in Maidstone losing its status as the principal business location in the county, which was awarded last year by the Kent Chamber of Commerce to Ashford. And that is likely to result in companies relocating, taking jobs out of the borough, resulting in fewer people wanting to invest, slowing down development, and the 106 money not being likely to come forward. So I would ask the Council how it is going to sort out Junction 7 in that context, if it still seeks a site to be south of Junction 7. Otherwise, I fear there's no alternative but for the site to be north. Thank you, sir.
Okay, I think we're going to have to draw matters to a close now because, as I say, we are over time and there's another meeting coming on in this room. So we will adjourn then to next Wednesday in relation to, well, in the morning we're having a housing supply session for invited participants and then the infrastructure session in the afternoon starting at 2. Okay. Thank you.
So I'm awfully sorry that I cannot be here next Wednesday. If it was your intention to continue this discussion...
No, I'm not intending to continue this discussion on transport. I've heard what you have to say on that. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.